Hi, in this video I'm going to address something that quite a number of people have written to us about to seek advice. And it's this: what happens if I've got a kind of chord scheme worked out that I'm quite happy with, and I don't really know how to construct a melody that belongs to it? Well, essentially, if you think about it, when you compose or improvise, you can start at one of two ends, can't you? You can begin with a melody if you've got a good melodic idea, and then you can work out which chords are going to fit with your melody. Or you can do the alternative, which is start with the chords and then construct the melody. Well, that's what we're going to do here. So quite often I think people do it the other way round. They kind of get a melody going and then they think, oh, which chords might fit this? But this is a perfectly reasonable way of going about it, and quite an interesting thing to try if you've not done it before as well. So I've got my chords. Here they are. We're in the key of F minor. So I've got an F minor chord, chord 1, a C major chord, chord 5, back to an F minor, a chord 1 in first inversion, so it's 1B. Now I've got a secondary dominant into B flat minor, which means that I'm going 5, 7B to 1 in B flat minor. Or I've got this F7 chord going to a B flat minor chord. And then I've got this chord, which is a 2-7B chord going on to a TS to Picardy. So an F major chord at the end. So some of that harmony is fairly predictable, but I've tried to put a bit of colour in there as well, just to make it a bit more interesting. So here's my chord scheme again. Okay, it doesn't matter what style you're writing in for now. This is just to show us the kind of technique of doing this. So how am I going to construct a melody from here? Because, you know, if you just had this melody at the top, it's a bit boring, isn't it? That would soon send everybody to sleep, wouldn't it? It's not the kind of melody you're going to remember terribly easily. So what can we do? Well, obviously in the melody, we can write notes that belong to the chord that's sounding at the time. What we don't want to do is to have notes going in the melody that don't really belong to the chord, because then it's all going to clash and sound horrible. And so that's not going to be a good plan. So using what we call harmony notes in the melody. So in this chord, I've got F, A flat, C. So as long as I write F, A flat, C up here, well, it's going to be fine. So why don't we start our melody by doing that? And I'm going to write a melody that's going quicker than the harmony. Often the way it is actually, if you just have one chord for every note of your melody, that can make it sound pretty tedious. That's one reason why this as a melody sounds pretty tedious. So I'm going to try and move it along a little bit. So how about for this first F minor chord, I just use notes that belong to that. Now, you might think, well, what can you do? Just stick an F in there, or a C, or an A flat? Well, no, you don't have to do that. You could actually have a little arpeggio where you go up the chord. Okay, so that could be the start of a melody. All I'm doing there is arpeggiating this chord, F, A flat, C, F. I haven't said what this is that's doing the melody. It's probably not going to be a singer doing that, but it could be an instrumentalist, like a flute or a clarinet or a violin or something. So here's my chord, and in the melody all I've done is this. But you see, it's already kind of full of life, isn't it? Now, what can I do next? Well, I could use some notes that belong to this chord, a chord of C, a chord 5 in F minor. So maybe I could go up to G, because that arpeggio is leading me up. Think about the direction of your melody and where you think it wants to go. And think about this stuff called voice leading. You know, you're playing a note and it kind of wants to go up one, or it wants to come down one. That's voice leading. Where does it want to go? And then maybe I could come down to an E natural there. So I'm just using two notes of the three notes that come in this chord. So the first bar goes. Sounds all right, doesn't it? If I wanted to be a bit more fussy, I could decorate it a little bit. You know, I could repeat that G. I could use this F. Now, you might then say, well, why is he using an F there? Because F doesn't belong to the chord. Sorry, you can't see that amazingly clearly, can you? But that There's an F I've put in there. The F doesn't belong to the chord, but it's what we call an inessential note. It's a passing note. It's passing by step between one note and another note that belong to the chord. So I started off with, now I've got, do you see it just adds a bit of rhythmic character to it, doesn't it? So, okay, where am I going to go next? Well, I've got this F minor chord, haven't I? So what could I do here? Well, this E natural is sort of pulling me back up to F. Can you hear that? So yeah, okay, let's go back to F. Now, if I've introduced sort of rhythmic ideas like this, I want to kind of use them again, don't I? So we might just think, well, can I get that figure to work here or maybe later on? So we don't just use it once. So what am I going to do now? I could be thinking, I had this arpeggio going up, so maybe I could start to use an arpeggio coming down. So we get a kind of shape of rise and fall in the melody. We also want a balance between what we call conjunct and disjunct movement. Conjunct next door neighbouring notes, disjunct leaping. Lots of leaps here, disjunct movement, conjunct movement here. So having done that, we might be ready for a bit more of the disjunct stuff. So maybe I could just do something like come down the arpeggio. So I could come down to a C, for example. You know, I could come down to an A flat. So I could just come down the arpeggio, but I'm just pausing for thought because I'm thinking, well, that'd be a bit obvious, wouldn't it? I'm going up the arpeggio, I'm coming down the arpeggio. So maybe I can come down the arpeggio, but maybe not do it in quite the same way. So maybe I could come up to this note. So you see what we've done now. There are so many possibilities for doing this, but it's just showing you one way of doing it. So now we've gone up the arpeggio, and then I've got conjunct movements there. I've come down the arpeggio, but everybody's expecting me to do that. So I've gone up to that. And now I'm going to move on to the next chord where we've got this chord. So why don't we go on to an E flat? And then what I might do is, having had the disjunct, use some conjunct. And do something like that. And that might take me on to a D flat that belongs to this chord. So can you see what I've done here? E flat's in this chord, F's in the chord as well. So they're all harmony notes, but having had disjunct movement, I'm trying to get a bit of conjunct movement in. So what have we got so far? Not the only way of doing this by a million miles, but one way of doing it. So do you see how that works? And the melody's got a kind of shape and a direction about it. This conjunct, disjunct movement balancing out. We can hear this voice leading, kind of notes want to go in certain places. When you hear this E flat, it pulls you down to D flat. It doesn't want to go anywhere else, does it? So that's kind of quite a useful thing to do. Okay, now I did say I wanted to get this figure in again. If I just use it once, it could sound a bit strange. So how about we just kind of use it here again? So tum pa tum. So same figure again. Okay, but it's obviously a transposed pitch. And then here, I could use the B flat because that's in the chord. This C is not in the chord, but it could be one of these inessential notes, one of these passing notes that I talked about. Or it could be what we call an upper auxiliary note, where you go B flat that belongs to the chord, you go up one, and then you come back to B flat again. Or I could go B flat, down one, back to B flat, that would be a lower auxiliary note. So you're using harmony notes, notes that belong to the chord, or you're using these inessential notes. Well, what should we do? We could either go up to D flat and treat it as a passing note, or we could go back to B flat and treat this C as an upper auxiliary note. Well, maybe I'll treat it as an upper auxiliary because we used a passing note or two back there, so just to show the difference. And then maybe we're wanting the melody to settle a bit because we're coming to the end. So that will be another note of the chord. And then maybe finishing on F is quite a good idea because, you know, we're coming back home to this F major chord, aren't we? You could have a little passing note in there. So we could, if we decided to elaborate it a bit, have an A flat in there. You don't have to do that, but it would work. So, as I say, it's just one possibility, and it's kind of in one kind of style. You could do this totally differently, but it's just to show how do you get a melody that goes faster than the chords, but a melody that belongs to the chords and has a kind of melodic identity. So what have we got? We've now got a melody that does this. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the greatest melody ever written. It's not going to set the Thames on fire particularly, but it's got a bit of character alongside the chords, and it fits the chords. Okay, so when you hear it with the chords, actually the chords enhance the melody, don't they? But in fact, what we've done is we've composed it the other way around. We've started with the chords, we've built a melody on top of it. So you're either using notes that belong to the chords, or you're using these inessential notes. You're trying to balance conjunct and disjunct movement a bit. There's quite a bit of disjunct movement in the first two bars, so I'm trying to make it a more conjunct finish as we go into the cadence at the end of the phrase, just to smooth it out a bit. And you're trying to give it a bit of character, melodic character, bit of rhythmic character as well. So you could work on that, you could develop it even further than that, you could make it more intricate, more fussy than that, you could make it less complicated than that, but that's the principle that I'm just trying to put across in this video. So I hope that's helpful for those of you who want to think about how to construct a melody from a given chord scheme.